Hi guys, it's Dr. Roman here. I just wanted to post up a video about diabetes that I've been meaning to put up for a long time. It's something that all diabetics should listen to because it really teaches them what's going on with their body, and that is important for figuring out how to treat it and for understanding how we're treating it and why we do the things we do. So if you know any diabetics and you're not one, but you know others, please let them know about this post because this is really important for them. I'll use the whiteboard, so see you there. Alright, here's Dr. Roman's lecture about diabetes. We call it diabetes mellitus because basically there's another type of diabetes and it's totally unrelated to this type, so just forget about it. There's type 1 and there's type 2, okay? Typically the type 1s are the kids that are coming in young, adolescents, dying, skinny as hell, lost weight over the months, don't know what's going on, and in something called diabetic ketoacidosis, where their body makes no more insulin, therefore they start to produce acid byproducts and they start to breathe it all off. They breathe extra hard to kind of ventilate off all the carbon dioxide and make their blood less acidic. On the other hand, type 2 diabetics are the more common ones. These are the adults. They're big, they're obese, and over time, because of an unhealthy lifestyle, they develop diabetes. It's also because probably they have it running in their family. Whereas this is the skinny old, or skinny young guy, I should say, who's just about to collapse on the ground, if you get what I'm saying, and needs a lot of water, a lot of hydration, and basically insulin. This guy, type 1, he stops producing insulin because of an autoimmune attack on the pancreas. This guy, type 2, or gal, is basically too much insulin because their body doesn't respond to it. So ultimately you get the same thing happening, which is high sugars, or as we know, hyperglycemia it's called from the fancy medical terminology. I'm going to focus primarily on type 2, but it should be noted that occasionally type 1s do present in adulthood. That's called late onset or late autoimmune disease of the adult, LADA, and occasionally that can happen to adults. That's very difficult to diagnose and control. But today we're going to focus mainly on type 2 diabetes, though really this sort of kind of fits in line with both. Basically what's going on is you've got the time of your day and you've got your blood glucose, aka sugar level, okay? Typical guy like me, he lets out insulin all day long, even when sleeping, and it kind of keeps the sugar at check. Let's say I'm not eating all day. I got a baseline insulin level that's coming out of my pancreas, which is kind of the digestive organ that's involved in both breaking down food as well as hormonal control. And anyway, that keeps my sugar down pretty good. Maybe let's say a little higher than that. And we definitely know that it's less than 100. Okay, that's a normal range. Probably mine is around 54 right now, just because I'm too busy working to eat. Now, what happens is during the day, you eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, then you have a mealtime snack and you go to sleep. We call the sugar level before breakfast the fasting blood glucose level. Why? Because you've been fasting all night long while you're sleeping. Yeah, I put crosses through my Z's. And when you wake up in the morning, you break your fast, hence the name breakfast, and you break that fast, and right before you start to eat, we've got something here called the fasting blood glucose. I'm going to put that as fasting blood glucose. Glucose is like fructose. High fructose corn syrup. It's full of sugar. People don't like it, but fructose, glucose, similar molecules there, both sugars. Anyhow, that's got to be under 100, and if it's over 100, consistently you pretty much have diabetes, and if it's higher than 120 or so, you definitely got diabetes. Anyway, let's go back to little old me, and I decide I want to eat some breakfast, and I'm going to eat a big bowl of let's say cereal, some orange juice, and some bagels with cream cheese and lox, which I really like. That's salmon for those that don't know. Anyhow, what happens? Well, my blood glucose, I'm drawing in blue here, it basically starts to absorb a spike from the sugars that are breaking down in my gut and starting to get absorbed. That happens around 15, 20, 30 minutes or so after you start swallowing that first meal. But because I have a normal pancreas and I respond to insulin normally, I'm sensitive to it, I have a corresponding increase in my insulin level. Boom. What happens? That quickly brings down the sugar back to normal. Ah, yay. My blood isn't full of sugar anymore, like molasses or honey just clogging up all the vessels, causing strokes in the brain and heart attacks from the big vessels getting involved, or renal failure, that's kidney failure, poor vision, and neuropathy, or tingling in my legs from the little vessels getting messed up in the nerves. Anyhow, good, back to thin blood, normal. Well, that happens 3 times. Each time I eat a meal, my insulin level goes up, my body responds, and it drops it back down. Now what happens to a type 1 diabetic? They basically have no insulin at all. They don't produce it. And their sugar, not only is it high during a spike of food, but it's actually just, let's call that 500. Very high all the time, causing the type 1s to pretty much go into this acidotic state where they almost die, and they need to come in the hospital emergently. Very high mortality with that. Now, on the other hand, what happens to a type 2 diabetic? Well, I think you know where I might be heading with this, but basically, the insulin level, or let's say the sugar level, is high. 500 is a bit more appropriate for type 2. Type 1 would be very ill in that situation. They start to get sick real quick. But a 500 blood glucose of a type 2 diabetic is totally tolerable for most. And they don't know, it's a silent disease, but since their sugar's so high, their insulin starts getting real high. Their pancreas tries to get it down, but it can't. So the insulin level's through the roof. But their bodies don't respond. And so therefore, this sugar level stays high as heck, not around the normal range where it should be. It's a big problem. So what do we do for these people? Well, there's oral meds like metformin, which I'm sure some of you type 2 diabetics are on, but those only do so much. And in all honesty, the best thing to do is to recreate your pancreas by administering your own insulin, just like it would. But that takes a lot of knowledge on what you're doing and exactly how you're playing your role. How you're acting as if you're an organ of the body, the pancreas, that just ain't cutting it for you anymore. So this is where it gets real sweet. you're type 2 diabetic, let's say moderate, your level's around 200. Should never be higher than 200 after a meal, or that's diagnostic. At least 2 hours after a meal. That's diagnostic for diabetes. Anyhow, you got this fasting level. Let's say you didn't eat overnight, you're about to eat your breakfast, it's at 200. If you're type 2, your insulin level's already high. Trying to keep it down, but it's not high enough. And so we need to give you some kind of insulin to just kind of keep your baseline down. That's called long-acting insulin. That's usually the form of Lantus, which is a brand name, or Lantus, what's the other one? Glargine, no, I don't recall right now off the top of my head. It'll come to me as I speak, but mainly Lantus is the one I'm most commonly used to seeing, and most of my patients are too. It might be Levemir. Anyhow, so we give a long-acting bolus, or not bolus, but long-acting insulin to cover you for 24 hours. That's a 2 and a 4, 24 hours, full day, just like that baseline insulin. So what you do is you add that to it, and now I'm going to say that the Lantus is a green because it's a drug and it's trying to be like the body, organic. So basically you're adding on top of this some amount of long-acting insulin. Basal insulin is another form of that, or name for that. Basal. Because it's your baseline insulin. So you give that, and that drops down your sugar level. Let's not say all the way to 100 like a normal person, but at least a little bit above. And bingo, suddenly you've got a much more controlled blood sugar level. Until you start eating. And that's where you get the peaks and the spikes. What happens when you eat? Well, the sugar, it starts to go up. Your insulin level, it tries to compensate, but it ain't doing the trick because your body's not sensitive to it. Or if you're a type 1, it can't compensate. You don't have insulin at all. So your sugar goes up, and it kind of never really gets down. And so when you eat your lunch, the same thing happens. Except this time, you're starting from an even higher value. And again you go up. And same with dinner. And your mealtime snack, because you're not fooling Dr. Roman. I know you eat mealtime snacks, I know it. Anyhow, what ends up happening is the sugar hopefully gets down back to your fasting, which is, controlled right now due to your basal insulin that you've been giving yourself, the Lantus. But the rest of the day you're screwed, basically. Your vessels are getting all jammed up with sugar. It's like never having an oil change, essentially, in your car. It's worse than that. It's like putting sugar in your gas tank. That's what happens to your blood vessels. What's going on in those pipes? It's like molasses. It's really bad for you. So, what do we do about that? Well, you can take your oral metformin. That'll help a little bit. Januvia orally with meals helps it get the sugar down after a meal. But again, the most optimal regimen is one where you are just recreating the insulin that your pancreas should be doing, or at least enough to get your body responding the way it's supposed to. That's why we give the next type of insulin. It's called, so this is the first type, basal long-acting lantus, or Levemir, I believe. And that's 24 hours. And then the next one we give is the Novolog. Some of you might remember that term too. Novolog. Oops. Also known as preprandial, meaning before eating. Before, not after. Preprandial, mealtime coverage. Novolog, that stuff acts for about 3 to 4 hours, so just about enough time between your meals, right? Makes sense. Perfect. So, the basal's there, now we need more. We need something. Recording cut out. What I was saying was, forget about the red line, that's your insulin level. Either you don't have any, that's a type 1, or more likely it's just through the roof and not important anymore. It doesn't work, or your body doesn't respond to it, I should say, in that situation. So forget it. What we need to do is give your body the extra insulin it needs. So that's when we give the Novolog, the type 2. Mealtime coverage. Before you eat that meal, you check your sugar level. If it's in the range that you're supposed to have it in because of your good old-fashioned Lantus, acting all day, acting all night, now it's time to get those sugar spikes down, so we give the short acting, boom, right there, before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner, and before you go to sleep. Why? And if you do that, and you give your mealtime spike of coverage, that causes your sugar level to also go back down. Oh, suddenly you're not up here anymore before lunch, you're down here, back in your normal range. Right? So we do the same thing. We give that extra mealtime insulin, preprandial, here. And again, that spike at lunch kind of gets controlled. Same with dinner. And your mealtime snack too, because I know you eat mealtime snacks. I know it. You're not fooling anybody. I'm a doctor. I know. You can't lie to me. This is where it gets complicated. So stick with me. What happens if you eat a cupcake with that breakfast you normally eat? Suddenly you got more sugar coming in than normal. That mealtime coverage isn't going to cut it anymore. You're going to need something extra. So what happens is, when it comes to your sugar, at lunchtime, the spike at breakfast was a little bit too big and it got stabilized, but not quite as much as it normally does. So when you check your pre-lunch blood glucose level, you find it's actually higher than it normally is. So what do? How do you correct that? Well, the answer is in that question. It's called correctional dosing, or correctional sliding scale insulin. I know you've heard of that before. That's when you take that Novolog, that fast-acting meal coverage, and you add a little booster to it in order to correct what you didn't cover for breakfast. You're correcting the cupcake. Now, usually these sliding scales range from anywhere from 0, which is you're at acceptable levels, to a little bit, like 2 units. Say this cupcake needs 2 units extra in order to get it down again and then make it a normal spike for the sugar absorbed at lunch. Or they can go as high as, I think 28's the high dose. sliding scale, but you can customize it, or your endocrinologist and your primary care doctor can customize it based on your own regimen and your own body. Now we're going to go into an overview. So we've got Lantus, long-acting. It's usually once a day, sometimes twice a day if you really need a lot of it. But normally it's once a day. So that's number one. That covers you for your general sugar level all day and night if you're not eating. Basal insulin. Number two is the short-acting with the meals. Novolog, also known as Aspart, insulin Aspart. And then finally, we take the same stuff and we make a correctional sliding scale insulin to correct the prior meals. Cupcake. And just one more thing for those who take insulin twice a day. These people use a different kind of insulin. It's a intermediate acting insulin that also has a component of a short acting insulin to it. So I drew already here the breakfast, lunch, dinner, and evening snack, because I know you do it, I know. You've got the intermediate acting and short acting. And what that does is it causes an insulin that's short acting to cover your breakfast, and then an intermediate acting that kind of runs out before dinner. So what happens is the sugar spike that forms gets pretty well covered and goes back down. But when you have a spike in your lunchtime, it doesn't really settle down before dinner. You got no true short-acting coverage there. But again, with dinner, you get that spike that's the short-acting, and then the 12-hour. Yeah, it really does last 12 hours, I guess, but 12-hour acting, 8 to 12 maybe if I remember correctly. 12-hour acting to kind of get you back down to normal. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, the problem is that really the lunchtime never gets truly covered well, the lunchtime blood glucose. So if you check your sugar before dinner, it's going to be high. That's the nature of the game. Why do we use this twice-acting form that doesn't cover lunch well? Because it's cheaper. So the twice-a-day form is cheaper, but you got to pull it up in a syringe, like old school days. Anyway, that's the basics of what we're doing and how we're trying to reproduce the actions of the normal pancreas. I hope this was informative, and I can go into other details in the future. Just please ask on the comments on YouTube or on the forum, and I'll address it. But I think that this is the sort of thing you never learn about in diabetic education or from your doctor. So signing off, this is Dr. Roman, and please follow us on YouTube, our website, the blog, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, did I say that already? Twitter, everything out there, Pinterest, you name it. Please follow, and there will be a lot more like this where this came from. Seriously, it's all in here. It's on. So, okay, this is Dr. Roman's lesson on endocannabinoids, and it is for a patient who I will not be discussing any specifics about, but since I'm doing this, I might as well do it on camera. Okay, so this is for you. Alright, inside our brain, which has this little thing here. Okay, so that's our brain, brainstem. We have an endocannabinoid system everywhere. Okay, and one of the main spots it's at is where the roots come out from the spinal cord into our arms, where we are very strong people, extramuscular. You know what I mean? As long as you kind of understand what I'm kind of getting at, like, who cares about how bad of an artist I am, right? You see what I'm saying. So, some of the spots that this endocannabinoid system, and I'll write that down. Endo, which means inside, cannabinoid. You know, you get it. It means cannabis stuff. Endocannabinoids is THC and it's CBD, those things we were talking about. But they just add endo to specify these are the ones that are internally naturally inside of us. That's all it is. So when we give THC, we're still giving the same thing that's inside of us, like glucose or I don't know, like whatever is inside of us. It's the same thing. It's just we're giving ourselves a boost with it. Now, where does this stuff work? So basically, it works in the brain. It works where these in the spinal cord, where the nerve roots arrive, and then it works also in our immune system. If you really are, you know, to really be detailed, we have something called a thymus in our neck, and that produces our white blood cells, and they go into the blood system. Now, the immune system is really quite interesting. It's probably the most difficult and there's too many misconceptions, but very complex. It's more complex than the brain, I would say, definitely. There's different types of cells. They each have a role. And like I was earlier saying, the immune system fights a bunch of things. It fights basically foreign organisms, bacteria, fungus, viruses, parasites. But it also fights our cancer cells. We always have cancer inside of us, and we can't help it. Proliferation. Cells die, like in our gut, for example, and they regenerate. And there's only so much times you can regenerate before some kind of mutation happens.
Right.
Most of the time, that just makes the cell kind of like act funny, and that's it. And they pick it up. This one ain't working right, and they eat it up and get rid of it before it starts to proliferate more. So in that way, that's what prevents cancer for us for the long run. It's when the cancer